I haven't spoken these words out loud in over 21 years. Not because I couldn't, but because there was no one left to hear them. Some memories press so deeply into the skin that they stop feeling like memories. They become part of your bone. This one has lived in my chest like a quiet weight, settling into every breath, every silence. People talk about betrayal like it's loud shouting, slamming doors, tearful confrontations. But the worst kind doesn't come with a warning. It comes in stillness. It looks like a hospital room with the blinds half closed, the breakfast tray untouched, and the hallway too quiet for the hour. It sounds like a phone that doesn't ring. I was 52 when my life divided itself into before and after. Before, I was a mother of 3, a widow, and a woman who still cooked full meals on holidays, even if half of them went uneaten. After, I was no longer sure what I was, sitting in a hospital gown, my hands folded neatly in my lap, waiting for a daughter who never came. Her name was Coraline, though everyone called her Cora. My firstborn, the one who used to fall asleep curled against my hip while I folded laundry. I had raised her through grief and thin years, through a marriage that ended at a grave site too early. I had tucked her into beds in apartments we couldn't afford and celebrated her first paycheck like it was a miracle. When her husband died, I opened my home and said, "We'll figure this out together." I meant it. That's what makes it worse, I think. Not that she left, but that I didn't see it coming. No one wants to believe that the people they raised could one day decide you were too much, too old, too inconvenient. I waited, still believing in her long after the nurses stopped asking if someone was coming. Long after I should have stopped. But this isn't just a story about what I lost. It's about the day the lie broke wide open on a cold morning in December, when I collapsed in the middle of my kitchen floor. It happened on Christmas Eve. I was in the kitchen, basting a small turkey and stirring the cranberry sauce, humming along to a radio that faded in and out between static and carols. The window above the sink was open just a crack, letting in the chill of the Arizona dusk. I remember thinking the air smelled like oranges and dust, like it always did when December rolled in too dry. Then came the pain. It wasn't sharp like a knife, more like a slow tightening, like invisible hands were reaching into my chest and wringing my heart like a dish towel. I reached for the counter but missed. The floor was cold against my cheek. The next thing I remember was Coraline's voice, panicked and raw. "Mom, Mom, stay with me." She had the phone in one hand and my wrist in the other. I couldn't speak, only blink. The lights above me blurred. Then sirens, then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed. Tubes in my arms, machines blinking quietly beside me. The lights were softer, and the air smelled like bleach and something else, something floral. Cora was there, seated in a stiff chair beside my bed, her eyes swollen from crying, holding my hand like it was something fragile. The doctor said it was a heart attack, a serious one. Said I was lucky to be alive, and that if I'd arrived 10 minutes later, I wouldn't have made it. Cora nodded solemnly. I could tell she'd already heard the whole thing. The next day, Reed arrived from Denver, then Jules from Calgary. I hadn't seen the three of them together in the same room for years. They brought flowers, chocolates, and old family jokes. Reed told stories about his kids. Jules made me laugh so hard I nearly pulled a stitch. Cora hovered near the nurse's station, asking questions, managing details, doing what she always did, taking charge. For a while it felt like the past had returned, softer and kinder than I remembered. There was warmth, attention, even affection. At night, they whispered when they thought I was asleep. I heard my name. I heard the word house. I closed my eyes tighter. Back then, I wanted to believe they were just worried about my recovery. But now, I know better. That was the week they started planning my goodbye. Years before the heart attack, I had signed the house over to my children, just in case. I said it the same way people say, just in case, before boarding a plane or going into surgery. It was meant to be a precaution, not a surrender. The deed was split evenly among the three. Cora insisted on fairness. I remember standing at the kitchen counter with the notary, hands still damp from washing dishes, signing my name with a ballpoint pen that barely worked. I didn't think of it as giving anything up. It was still my home. After the heart attack, Cora moved through the hospital like she owned the place. She knew the nurses by name, carried a clipboard, and nodded through every doctor's update like a second opinion lived inside her head. She started adjusting my medication schedule herself, tapping on her phone and handing me pills with water before I even asked. Nurse Patras didn't like it. I could tell. She was a kind woman, maybe in her late 50s, with a no-nonsense voice that softened when she spoke to me. Once, while she changed my IV, she glanced toward the hallway where my children stood talking. "They sure are organized," she murmured. I smiled. At the time, I took it as a compliment. But there was something in her tone, something I should have recognized. I started noticing things. The way they spoke when they thought I was asleep. I'd hear phrases like, "once she's out," or, "we need to move quickly." My name came up, often followed by long silences. One afternoon, Cora sat beside my bed with a folder in her lap. She asked if I remembered where my will was. Said it would be helpful to review it, just to be safe. I told her it hadn't changed. Everything went to the three of them, as always. She gave me a smile I couldn't quite read and patted my arm like I was a tired child. It wasn't until I woke up early one morning and caught Patrice staring at me, not in pity, but with a kind of warning in her eyes, that I started to wonder. That was 2 days before I put on my best dress and waited by the window. Expecting to go home that Friday morning, I woke before dawn and dressed slowly, carefully, like I was getting ready for church. I chose the blue dress with the pearl buttons, my favorite, the one I wore to Kura's wedding. It still fit, just a little looser at the waist. I brushed my hair, added a touch of lipstick, and placed my small bag by the door with the medications the doctor had explained in patient tones the night before. Everything was in order. Patrice smiled when she walked in and saw me sitting on the edge of the bed, upright, ready. "You look lovely, Miss Calderon," she said gently. "Discharge time is around 8. I nodded. I didn't mind waiting. My children were coming to take me home. By 9 o'clock, I was still waiting. I told myself they were stuck in traffic. By 10, I told myself someone had simply forgotten to call the nurse's station. By 11, my hands began to tremble. I asked Patrice if she could call the house, the one on Willow Lane. I recited the number from memory. She hesitated, but then dialed and handed me the phone. A woman answered, young, cheerful. "Hello, this is the Brooks residence." My stomach turned. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice tight. "I think I misdialed. I'm looking for Coraline Calderon." There was a pause. "Oh, I'm not sure who that is. We just moved in last week. My husband bought the place as a surprise. Maybe you have the wrong number." I hung up. My hand didn't shake, it went numb. The number hadn't changed. The house on Willow Lane wasn't mine anymore. I tried Reed, voicemail. I tried Jules, disconnected. Then I tried Cora. A pre-recorded message told me the number was no longer in service. Patrice saw my face when I put the phone down. She didn't say anything, just walked over and laid a hand on my shoulder, then quietly stepped out of the room. For the first time that day, I looked down at my dress and saw how wrong it was. Too formal, too hopeful. I sat on the bed again, folded my hands in my lap, and waited as if someone might still walk through that door. It wasn't until late afternoon that someone finally did. The footsteps in the hallway weren't hurried. They moved with a kind of practiced calm that only made my heart beat faster. When the door opened, it wasn't one of my children. It was a woman I didn't know. Older, with a crisp uniform and folders tucked under her arm. She introduced herself as the head nurse. Her face was not unkind, but it was tired. She sat in the chair beside my bed and cleared her throat gently. "Miss Calderon, I need to speak with you about your discharge status." I nodded. My voice lodged somewhere too deep to reach. She opened the folder and laid out a series of printed pages. "These are official documents signed by your family. They state that none of your children is able or willing to assume post-hospital care. They have waived responsibility, both legal and medical." My ears rang. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Or maybe she'd mistaken me for someone else. I looked at the signature line, at the familiar loops and strokes of my children's names in blue ink. My hand went to my throat, I couldn't speak. "They left these forms with the administration late last night," she added. "They made it clear they would not be returning." I didn't cry at first. I just stared at the papers, trying to connect the people I raised to the names scrawled across the bottom of those pages. Then it came. A low sound that grew into something I couldn't control. I wept like I hadn't since the night my husband died, when I held his hand until it went cold. The room was quiet except for my breathing and the hum of machines no longer needed. Patrice walked in quietly, holding a cup of coffee. She sat down next to me and didn't ask anything. She just handed me the cup and rested her hand on my back. "I've seen this too many times," she said softly, "more than I care to count." I nodded, unable to look up. But somewhere deep inside, I felt something shift, something small but solid. It was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. That night, after the hallway lights dimmed, I opened the drawer beside my bed and found an old memory tucked between my socks. The letter had been in my underwear drawer for years, tucked between an old scarf and a few folded slips I never wore anymore. It was from Lucia, my younger sister, the only one I had left. The envelope was yellowing around the edges, creased from time and the weight of everything I'd tried to forget. She'd sent it 5 or 6 years earlier, after a birthday I never replied to. The handwriting was round, a little crooked, still full of light. In it, she told me about her little garden in Pasadena, about the tomatoes that kept dying in the heat, and the neighbors who brought over flan just because. She'd written, "I still miss the way you used to hum when you cleaned. I hope you're happy." I mean that. We hadn't spoken in more than a decade. Not really. A few holiday cards, one rushed phone call when her husband got sick. But underneath the silence, there had always been something intact, not perfect but unbroken. I told Patris about the letter. She didn't hesitate. She brought the hospital phone into my room and dialed the number I recited slowly, afraid I'd forget midway through. It rang once, then twice. On the third ring, Lucia picked up. At first, there was confusion, then disbelief, and then a silence that felt like her hand reaching through the line. "Inez," she said, her voice cracking. "Is it you?" And just like that, the tears came again. I told her everything. About the heart attack, about the children, about the house. She didn't interrupt, just breathed with me until I ran out of words. Then she said, without hesitation, "Come live with me. You're my sister. You're not staying there." And for the first time since the collapse in my kitchen, I let myself imagine going somewhere I was wanted. Lucia moved quickly. Within a day, she had spoken to a lawyer she knew through her church, arranged for funds to be wired to the hospital, and started the paperwork to bring me to California. She didn't ask for details about what my children had done, only what I needed now. Patris helped with the hospital discharge. She found me a soft sweater from the lost and found, packed my prescriptions carefully into a small borrowed suitcase, and slipped a travel-sized bottle of lotion into the side pocket. "Just something nice," she said. I didn't trust my voice enough to say thank you out loud. I only brought 3 things of my own: a faded photo of my husband from the first Christmas we spent together, my rosary, and the pair of shoes he'd once said made me look like I walked with purpose. The cab pulled up to the hospital entrance that morning just after sunrise. Patris walked me out, holding my elbow gently like I might change my mind. As I reached for the door, she squeezed my arm. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "Don't let this be the end of your story." I nodded and stepped inside. The cab driver didn't ask questions. I watched through the window as we passed through the streets I had known for so long. The church where I was married, the grocery where I'd run into old neighbors, the corner cafe where I used to meet Cora for coffee before she became someone else entirely. Everything looked smaller now, faded, like the town had already moved on without me. By the time we reached the airport, I had stopped looking back. My boarding pass shook slightly in my hand, but I held it tight. A flight I was never supposed to take was now the only path forward. The airport was a blur of noise and motion, but I only remember one sound: my name, shouted across the crowd like it had been waiting years to escape someone's mouth. I turned and saw Lucia pushing past travelers in luggage carts, her arms already open. She looked older, softer around the edges, but her eyes were the same. We hugged so tightly I thought neither of us would let go. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't need to. She just took my bag, wrapped an arm around my shoulder, and said, "Let's get you home." Pasadena was quieter than I imagined. Her neighborhood was full of modest stucco houses and blooming vines that curled up iron fences. People waved from porches. Children rode bikes barefoot, and the air smelled like spices and orange blossoms. It was nothing like Tucson, but somehow it didn't feel foreign. It felt steady. Her home was small, 1 story, painted yellow with blue trim, and the screen door squeaked when it opened. Inside was warmth, real warmth. A pot of beans on the stove, a crocheted blanket on the couch, and music playing softly from a dusty radio near the kitchen. It didn't take long to notice the signs of a life built with care. Matteo came out from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. He was tall, with silver hair and a smile that didn't feel forced. "You're Inez," he said, reaching out to take my hand in both of his. "She's been talking about you for years." He didn't say, "Welcome," like it was a formality. He said it like he meant it. That night, they made me tea and insisted I sleep in their bedroom while they took the pull out. I protested, of course, but Lucia just shook her head. You need rest. We'll have time to argue later. I lay down in a bed that wasn't mine, under a roof I didn't build, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was intruding. In the morning, I woke to the smell of tortillas and laughter drifting in from the kitchen. Lucia took me to her church that first weekend. It was a small chapel tucked behind a laundromat, filled with folding chairs and warm voices. No one asked where I came from. They simply handed me a cup of coffee and asked if I liked tamales. That was all it took. By the next week, I was signed up for English classes at the community center. Lucia said it would help me feel more at home. I was nervous, embarrassed even, but the instructor was kind and patient. We started with simple greetings, and every time I got one right, the room seemed a little less foreign. Soon, I began spending mornings on the porch, waving to neighbors, watching the rhythm of the street. That's how I met Esperanza, the young mother next door. One day, she asked if I could watch her 2 toddlers for an hour. That hour became 2, then 4, then a part-time routine. The children started calling me Abula Inez. At first, it startled me. Then it soothed something I didn't know was still raw. I made them lunch, sang lullabies, and held them when they fell. It wasn't blood, but it was love. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the window. I was smiling, not pretending, really smiling. That's when I realized I was living again. It had been nearly 6 years since I left Tucson when the truth finally reached me. I was watering Lucia's garden one afternoon when a woman walking by slowed down, staring. She tilted her head, then smiled. Inez Calderon. From Willow Lane, I froze. Her name was Lydia. She used to live 3 doors down from me. We hugged like old friends, though neither of us had ever shared more than borrowed sugar and neighborly waves. She looked around, surprised. I thought you were... Well, I didn't know what to think. She told me she'd run into Cora shortly after I left town. My house had gone on the market just days after my hospital stay. Lydia had asked where I was, and Cora had said something vague about a care facility and early signs of memory loss. She told everyone you were declining mentally. Lydia said, her voice tight. Said you wouldn't remember much soon anyway. The house sold fast, below market, cash offer. Cora had handled the paperwork while Reed and Jules stayed quiet. It had been planned for months. I stood there, hose in hand, letting the water soak the dirt until it pooled around my feet. It wasn't the sale that shocked me. It wasn't even the lie. It was the ease of it all, the efficiency, like I had been a piece of furniture. Moved, sold, forgotten. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and finally let the truth settle in, not as a wound, but as a fact. And in that clarity, something unexpected began to rise. Not once in 21 years did I hear from any of them. No calls, no letters, not even a birthday card out of obligation. For a long time, that silence felt like a punishment. Then, slowly, it became peaceful. Now I'm 73. I live in a small apartment 2 blocks from Lucia. I volunteer twice a week, still help with the children next door. And every Sunday I sit beside a man named Hector at church. He lost his wife 10 years ago. We don't talk much about the past. Some things don't need explaining. I've written dozens of letters to my children over the years, none of which I mailed. Most were angry. A few were pleading. Only one felt complete. It sits folded in my drawer, under a linen cloth. It says simply thank you. Because you left, I had to learn to stand. Because you sold my house, I found a home. Because you walked away, I walked into the life I deserved. I hope someday you find peace. I already have. I don't think they'll ever read it, but I don't need them to. The person I wrote it for was me, and she's doing just fine.